Particularly if you're a self-taught artist, are you frustrated at putting lots of effort into drawing, but not being able to change the way your drawings look in the way you want to? Not being able to move them more towards the picture that you have in your mind or towards what you see others drawing? I think one of the biggest reasons for this is that we've actually misunderstood what the drawing process is about, and that sets us up for frustration. Give me 5 minutes to explain, and this may just be the light bulb moment where suddenly you understand where all of these frustrations are coming from, what's stopping you progressing your drawing in the way you want, and better yet, from this understanding, get a clearer picture of the way ahead to get to the drawings you want to be making. And I think the heart of it is that when we think about what drawing is, how often is this what we actually think about? We think of the pen on the paper, the ink creating lines that bring a scene into reality. We see the rhythm of the pen, the confidence of the mark making, the accuracy of the placement in reference to our photo, the straightness of the lines perhaps, or the darkness of values that are being created. And we think, how can I put my marks on the paper like this? How can I make my pen do that? What sort of practice is needed doing what sort of things to develop this confidence, to be able to create these effects, to get that accuracy? Are there any tricks or tips or techniques that actually make it easier to move our pen in the right way to get what we want more frequently? Because what we see of the drawing process is the pen ink flowing onto the paper, and the ink comes from the pen and the pen is moved by the hand. This is what we see. This is what we want to be able to learn to do. This is what we focus on or try to focus on, because this is what creates the drawing. But the problem is, this is not only not what the whole drawing process is, but it's actually the lesser part. The ink on the paper part is in fact the lesser part of the drawing process. It's the lesser part both in not being as difficult as what the rest is to learn, and perhaps more importantly, it's the lesser part in terms of not being the really important cause of how our drawings look. And if we want to change how they look, it's not where our focus should be. We see the ink and the putting of the ink on the paper. But the really important thing is not this, but it's knowing where to put the ink on the paper. But before we can know where to put the ink on the paper, we have to know what mark or line we're wanting to put on the paper. And before we can know that, we need to know why we're going to put it on the paper. What effect am I wanting to create in that spot, with what mark to create it placed where? And can you see that knowing what I'm trying to create is the start? It's not just the start though, it's actually the guide that decides everything else I do from that point on. Knowing what effects I'm trying to create is the guide for telling me what I'm doing. That gives me the direction. And then being able to combine all these individual marks together to create an overall scene needs to happen. And again, knowing what we want to have at the end guides that process. It's not about copying something. It's about creating something, and the creative process starts in our mind. It all happens in our mind, not our hand. Our hand, in fact, becomes a tool like the pen. The pen doesn't decide what it's going to draw, and neither does our hand. Our mind has to determine all of that and then use our pen in our hand to create that. And if we don't realize this, then we put our effort and energy into developing our, if you like, pen technical skills when what we really need to be working at developing are our creative thought processes before we pick up the pen. Because they're the more important part, they're what determines what we do, and without these being strong, we can never develop the confidence and the consistency and the direction for the sorts of drawings that we have in our mind. These creative thought processes I think of as being like translation work, where we have to translate what we see into our drawing. We take one thing, whether it's a photo, whether it's something in front of us in life, or whether it's from our imagination, and we have to transform it into something else, into ink marks on paper, to say something that is almost certainly similar from what we started with, but in a very real way is being said totally differently, and maybe even saying something a bit different as well. If I don't know what to draw, or if I'm not able to draw what I want to draw, it's almost certainly not because I can't move a pen on the paper, but it's because I haven't worked out before I've picked up my pen the why, the how, or the where I want to move it. So instead of focusing on ink on paper techniques and skills and videos, can I say, we need to put that energy and time into drawing exercises that actually train our mind and help us to train our mind to think, to observe, to plan, to do all that has to be done so that we know what we're wanting to create and therefore what marks we need to use and where we need to put them to create that end piece that's in our mind. This is, without doubt, a harder process to both get our head around and to develop than simply marks on paper. But it's the fundamental reason why I think our marks on paper so often don't live up to the hopes that we have. And it's why I have as many videos that deal with thinking before we start to draw, because I'm so convinced that this is what we actually need to learn, the thought processes that are so often totally neglected. And I know that this was the key for my leapfrogging in my drawing development when I realized I had to come to understand the process a lot better than I did. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I would even say that this is so important that what happens in our mind before we pick up our pen is probably 80% of the input that's needed to create the drawing that we want to create, and that the actual pen on the paper skills is no more than 20%. And yet how often do we both focus on the 20%, not just in terms of assessing how we're going, but in terms of what we're trying to learn to improve what we're doing. And so we keep looking for another video that will give me the technique tip or shortcut or hack, because we think there must be something I'm doing wrong with putting my marks onto the paper. And yet what we put onto the paper always comes from how we think. And it's almost certain, in my estimation and my experience, that if we're not getting the marks on the paper that we want, it's not lack of technical skills, it's lack of understanding, it's lack of the creative thought processes that we need to give us the direction to choose our marks, to know where they want to go. And I actually believe it's mostly from that place that we get our confidence when we put the marks. It's because we know what we're doing. We're not experimenting and exploring. We're not trying this here and trying that there and hoping that together it looks the way we want it to look. Our creative thinking is telling us what to do all the way through the drawing. And the good news is we can train our thinking. We can practice and do exercises that do develop this creative translation in our mind from reference to drawing. In fact, it's clear from this video that I would say that this is where we need to put our focus. So if your drawings aren't always turning out the way you'd like them to, I really hope this video has given you some places where you can go to work on to start to see the sorts of change you want. But hey, whatever you draw, however you draw it, however it turns out, whatever process you're following, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.